1. The Market by the Nile. Imagine yourself stepping into a lively Egyptian market more than 3,000 years ago. The morning sun spills its golden light over the Nile, painting the riverbanks with a shimmer that seems eternal. You hear the chatter of merchants calling out their goods, the clatter of baskets filled with figs, dates, and nuts, the soft laughter of children chasing each other through the stalls. The air is a tapestry of aromas: freshly baked bread from clay ovens, the sharp tang of dried fish, and the sweet perfume of honey dripping from clay pots. This is not just a place to buy necessities. This is where culture, taste, and daily life come together. But most importantly for us, this is where you would find the beloved snacks of ancient Egypt. When we think of ancient Egypt, we often imagine grand monuments, mysterious hieroglyphs, and glittering treasures sealed away in tombs. Rarely do we pause to wonder about the simpler joys of everyday life, what people nibbled on between meals, what they offered to their gods, or what they packed along for long journeys under the desert sun. And yet, these seemingly small details tell us as much about who they were as their pyramids do. Snacks are, after all, a window into comfort, pleasure, and survival. Bread was the heartbeat of Egyptian cuisine, so it is no surprise that it was also their most common snack. But this was not the soft, fluffy bread we know today. Egyptian bread was made from emmer wheat or barley, producing a denser, heartier loaf. Archaeologists have uncovered small, round loaves buried with the dead, showing that bread was so vital it followed Egyptians into the afterlife. Some were flavored with honey, dates, or herbs, turning them into treats that would feel surprisingly familiar to us. Imagine a pyramid builder pausing mid-shift to bite into a chewy loaf filled with sweet figs, a snack as satisfying as any energy bar sold today. Fruits provided another cornerstone of snacking. Dates and figs were abundant, and both could be dried for storage, making them portable and long-lasting. Grapes and sycamore figs added variety, while honey elevated these fruits into indulgent delights. Honey was not just food, it was medicine, a sacred substance, and the foundation of many sweet snacks. In fact, some texts suggest Egyptians may have rolled nuts and fruits in honey, creating early versions of what we might call candy. The combination of sweetness, nutrition, and portability made these snacks perfect for workers, travelers, and even the wealthy elite. Nuts and seeds also played their role. Almonds, sesame seeds, and especially tiger nuts, small tubers that taste like a mix between almonds and coconut, were enjoyed widely. Archaeological evidence even reveals recipes for tiger nut cakes, a mixture of ground nuts, honey, and oil pressed into little bars. Doesn't that sound astonishingly modern? These were snacks that delivered both energy and pleasure, bridging the practical with the enjoyable. But snacks were not limited to sweets. Savory bites existed too. Dried fish, strips of cured beef, or roasted goose offered salty, protein-rich treats. These foods were prized during festivals or for long journeys, providing sustenance when fresh meals were not available. For the wealthier Egyptians, these savory snacks were part of banquets, where small bites and drinks entertained guests long into the night. And then there was beer, the drink that was also a snack, thick, cloudy, and made from bread itself. Beer was nourishment in liquid form. Workers on the pyramids received daily rations of bread and beer, sometimes paired with onions and garlic, to fuel their exhausting labor. For many Egyptians, beer was the companion to their snacks, washing down dried fish or complementing a sweet honey loaf. For the elite, wine might accompany their meals, but beer was the universal refreshment, loved across all classes. What makes these snacks fascinating is not just their ingredients, but the stories behind them. Consider the pyramid builders who toiled under the blazing sun, sustained by bread, onions, and beer. These were not luxurious meals. but they were enough to keep one of history's greatest projects alive. Or think of the loaves of bread placed carefully into the tombs of pharaohs, intended to nourish their spirits for eternity. These snacks were not trivial. They were symbols of life, death, and the continuity between. As you stand in that imaginary Egyptian market, picture yourself holding a piece of honey-drizzled bread in one hand and a cup of cool beer in the other. Around you, nobles haggle over figs, priests bless offerings of nuts, and farmers laugh as they trade onions for fish. The snacks here are not just food. They are community, ritual, and comfort, all baked into simple, portable bites. And in their own way, they remind us that no matter how grand or humble, humans everywhere have always loved their snacks. This is only the beginning of our journey into ancient Egyptian snacking culture. As we move forward, we will peel back more layers of history, discover fascinating recipes, and uncover how even the smallest bites carried meaning in the lives of these remarkable people. 2. Bread, the heart of Egypt. If there was one food that defined ancient Egypt more than any other, it was bread. It was the foundation of their diet, the centerpiece of their meals, and the very symbol of life itself. To understand Egyptian snacks, we must first understand bread, not just as sustenance but as a cultural treasure. Imagine the smell of warm loaves drifting from clay ovens, the sound of grinding stones turning emmer wheat into coarse flour, and the sight of bakers shaping small rounds of dough to be sold in the bustling markets. Bread was more than just food. It was currency. Workers could be paid in loaves, priests received bread as temple offerings, and families prayed that their harvest would yield enough grain to fill their ovens. For a pyramid builder, bread was both breakfast and snack, eaten quickly before heading back to the colossal blocks of stone. For a farmer, it was packed into baskets to be eaten under the hot sun. Even for nobles, bread appeared at lavish banquets, sometimes infused with honey or spices, transforming it from everyday fuel into something indulgent. The most common breads were made from emmer wheat and barley. These grains were hardy enough to thrive along the Nile, but their coarse texture meant the bread was often gritty. Archaeologists examining ancient loaves have found fragments of sand and stone from the grinding process embedded within them. Imagine biting into a chewy, dense loaf only to feel the crunch of grit between your teeth. It was a normal part of the Egyptian dining experience. Yet despite this, bread remained beloved, proof that necessity often trumps perfection. Snack-sized breads were especially popular. Small round loaves and flatbreads could be eaten quickly or carried easily on journeys. In many ways, they were the ancient equivalent of modern rolls or pita bread. Some were shaped into animals or decorative forms, likely reserved for festivals or religious offerings. In tombs, these decorated loaves have been found alongside beer jars and fruits, prepared to feed the dead for eternity. The symbolism was clear. Bread meant life, and life was eternal. What makes Egyptian bread truly fascinating is its variety. While the majority of people ate plain barley or wheat loaves, wealthier households experimented with flavors. Honey could be drizzled into dough, turning the bread into a sweet treat. Dates or figs might be chopped and mixed in, creating an early version of fruit bread. Herbs like coriander or dill added flavor, while sesame seeds sprinkled on top gave texture. Some records even mention bread soaked in milk or shaped like little cakes, blurring the line between staple and dessert. Consider the story of the workers at Deir el-Medina, the village of artisans who built the tombs of the Valley of the Kings. Records from the site reveal detailed lists of bread rations distributed daily. Each worker received loaves of specific sizes, and these were often supplemented by small flavored breads on special occasions. Bread was not just food here. It was part of the rhythm of life, an expected rite for those who labored to create Egypt's eternal monuments. Imagine taking a break after carving hieroglyphs into stone, reaching for a round loaf sweetened with honey, and feeling a small moment of joy amid backbreaking work. Bread also carried deep spiritual meaning. In religious rituals, bread was offered to the gods as a symbol of life and renewal. Temples baked loaves daily to be presented on altars, later shared among priests and worshippers. In funerary traditions, bread was placed in tombs to sustain the soul in the afterlife. These were not symbolic gestures alone. The Egyptians truly believed that the spirit would consume the essence of the offerings, continuing the eternal cycle of nourishment. One particularly fascinating discovery was the preserved bread loaves found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. These small, hardened breads were placed carefully beside other treasures, showing that even a boy king needed snacks for his journey beyond. Scientists analyzing these loaves found traces of dates and honey, suggesting that Tutankhamun's final snacks were not just practical but indulgent, a reflection of his royal status. The process of making bread was laborious. Women and servants spent hours grinding grain between stone querns, producing flour that was often coarse and uneven. Water and yeast were mixed in, and the dough was left to rise in clay bowls. The loaves were baked in dome-shaped clay ovens or directly on heated stones, giving them a smoky, rustic flavor. Children often helped with kneading, learning the rhythms of bread-making from an early age. It was not simply cooking. It was a communal act, one that bound families and neighbors together. And yet, despite its humble nature, bread could also be luxurious. Banquets thrown by nobles might feature dozens of bread varieties, shaped, spiced, and decorated to impress guests. Imagine a table where savory breads flavored with herbs sat beside sweet loaves dripping with honey, where some breads were molded into the shapes of birds or flowers. These were not the gritty loaves of the commoner, but works of culinary art, designed to delight as much as to nourish. In the end, bread was both the simplest and most profound snack in ancient Egypt. For the poor, it was survival. For workers, it was energy. For nobles, it was a canvas of flavor. And for the gods, it was the essence of life itself. To hold a loaf of bread in your hand was to hold the Nile's bounty, the labor of countless hands, and the promise of both earthly and eternal nourishment. 3. Sweet fruits of the Nile. If bread was the foundation of ancient Egyptian life, then fruits were the jewels that brightened every meal and satisfied cravings between them. The Nile Valley, blessed with fertile soil and a generous climate, produced a variety of fruits that served not only as food but also as luxuries, offerings, and symbols of abundance. These fruits were more than snacks. They were gifts from the gods, tokens of prosperity, and treasures that traveled far beyond Egypt's borders. Imagine walking through an orchard along the Nile around 1500 BCE. The air is heavy with the scent of ripe figs, the buzzing of bees collecting nectar from sycamore trees, and the sight of workers climbing ladders to harvest clusters of grapes. In the shade, baskets of dates are piled high, their glossy brown skins glistening in the sun. This was the Egyptian snack table, fresh from nature's hand. Among all fruits, dates were the most iconic. Sweet, chewy, and full of energy. Dates were eaten fresh, dried, or even fermented into a type of wine. They were portable, long-lasting, and nourishing, perfect for workers in the fields or travelers journeying through the desert. Children loved them as natural sweets, while priests offered them to the gods in temples. Archaeologists have found baskets of dates preserved in tombs, proof of their enduring importance. In some ways, they were the ancient equivalent of today's energy bars. Compact, sweet, and sustaining. Figs held an equally special place. Both regular figs and the unique sycamore fig thrived in Egypt. Their soft, jam-like texture and natural sweetness made them beloved by all classes. Tomb paintings show workers gathering figs, while texts describe them as essential rations. In certain myths, Sycamore figs were associated with the goddess Hathor, who was said to provide sustenance to the souls of the dead from the branches of the sacred tree. To eat a fig was not just to enjoy a snack, but to partake in a divine blessing. Grapes, though less common than dates and figs, were prized for their versatility. They could be eaten fresh, dried into raisins, or pressed into wine, a drink reserved for the wealthy and for ritual occasions. While beer nourished the everyday worker, wine was the indulgence of nobles and pharaohs, often paired with fruits and breads during lavish banquets. Imagine a noblewoman reclining in her garden, plucking grapes from a bronze dish while musicians play and servants bring cups of cool water flavored with herbs. For her, grapes were not just food but status itself. Honey elevated these fruits into true delicacies. Drizzled over figs or dates, it transformed simple snacks into luxuries fit for kings. Honey was rare and precious, harvested from hives kept in clay cylinders or woven baskets. Beekeepers, depicted in tomb paintings, are shown carefully handling smoke to calm their bees while collecting golden combs. Beyond its sweetness, honey carried symbolic weight as a divine substance, associated with the sun god Ra. Mixed with fruits, it created treats that bridged earthly pleasure with heavenly meaning. Specific examples of fruit enjoyment can be found in historical records. In the tomb of Rekhmire, an official of the 18th dynasty, paintings depict servants carrying trays loaded with figs, grapes, and dates to a feast. The detail is so vivid that one can almost taste the sticky sweetness of the fruit. In another example, archaeologists discovered jars filled with preserved dates and raisins in the burial chambers of nobles, carefully sealed to ensure freshness for the afterlife. These discoveries confirm that fruits were not just fleeting pleasures, but eternal companions, meant to sustain the soul across eternity. Fruits also had medicinal uses. Dates were believed to aid digestion, figs were used in poultices, and grapes appeared in remedies for fevers. Honey mixed with fruits was considered a cure for sore throats and infections, a blend of taste and healing. In this way, snacks were not merely indulgences, but tools of survival and health, woven into the Egyptian understanding of balance and well-being. Consider, too, the festivals where fruits played starring roles. During celebrations of the harvest, villagers piled baskets of figs and dates in temple courtyards as offerings. Children snuck bites when priests weren't looking, savoring the sweetness as part of the communal joy. These moments reveal that snacks were not just personal treats, but communal experiences, shared across classes, ages, and occasions. The symbolism of fruits extended even into art and literature. In love poems from the New Kingdom, lovers compared kisses to the sweetness of figs and the taste of grapes. Fruits became metaphors for passion, fertility, and pleasure, carrying meanings far beyond the orchard. In this way, snacks shaped not only the stomach, but also the imagination of ancient Egypt. So, what do these fruits tell us about the Egyptian spirit? They remind us that even in a land defined by stone monuments and rigid rituals, there was always room for sweetness. A farmer resting in his field chewing on a dried date, a noble sipping wine while savoring grapes, a child stealing a fig from a temple offering. These moments, simple yet profound, show that the desire for tasty, comforting snacks is timeless. As we peel back the layers of history, we see that the fruits of the Nile were more than just food. They were symbols of love, gifts to the gods, treasures for the dead, and pleasures for the living. And in every bite, they carried the richness of Egypt's land, the power of its myths, and the sweetness of life itself. 4. Nuts, seeds, and sweet creations. When we think of snacks today, we might imagine chips, cookies, or candy bars. For the ancient Egyptians, however, one of the most beloved snack categories was far simpler, yet surprisingly inventive: nuts and seeds. Small, portable, nutritious, and versatile, these humble foods were transformed into everything from crunchy bites to sweet desserts that could rival modern confections. The Egyptians loved almonds, sesame seeds, and especially tiger nuts. Now, tiger nuts are not nuts at all, but small, wrinkled tubers with a sweet, nutty flavor, tasting like a mix of almonds and coconut. They were extremely popular in ancient Egypt, showing up in both daily life and funerary offerings. Archaeologists have uncovered recipes carved into tomb walls that describe grinding tiger nuts into flour, mixing them with honey, and shaping them into small cakes. Imagine biting into one, chewy, sweet, and rich with natural oils. In many ways, this was an ancient energy bar, compact, long-lasting, and packed with calories. Sesame seeds, meanwhile, were often pressed into oil, but they were also sprinkled over breads and cakes. Their earthy crunch added texture to otherwise dense loaves, elevating bread from mere sustenance to something delightful. Almonds, imported from the Levant, were rarer and more expensive, often reserved for the wealthy. When available, they were roasted, mixed into pastries, or eaten plain, symbolizing luxury and abundance. One of the most fascinating examples of nut-based snacks comes from the tomb of Rekhmiri, where depictions show servants preparing what appear to be sweet confections made of tiger nuts, honey, and possibly figs. Scholars believe these were early prototypes of candy-like treats, meant to entertain guests at feasts or accompany nobles into the afterlife. The combination of honey and nuts created a snack that was not only delicious, but also symbolic, blending sweetness with the energy of the earth. Honey was the magician that tied everything together. Without sugar cane, which would only come centuries later, honey was Egypt's golden sweetener. Mixed with nuts, fruits, and seeds, it transformed ordinary ingredients into indulgent desserts. Think of honey-coated sesame bars or sticky tiger nut clusters. These were the Egyptian equivalent of modern brittle or nougat. And because honey also had antibacterial qualities, these snacks could be stored for longer periods, making them ideal for travelers or long journeys across the desert. Snacking was not just about taste, it was about ritual. Nuts and honey-based sweets often appeared in festivals and religious offerings. During temple ceremonies, trays of sweet cakes were presented to the gods, later shared among priests and worshippers. These offerings were more than food. They were prayers in edible form, gifts meant to please divine beings. For Egyptians, eating a honey cake was not just satisfying hunger, but participating in a sacred tradition. Evidence of these snacks has even been found in the most unexpected places: the tombs of the dead. In some burial chambers, archaeologists discovered jars filled with nut cakes and honey-coated seeds, carefully sealed for eternity. These weren't just symbolic, they were practical. The Egyptians believed the ka, or soul, required nourishment in the afterlife. And what better snack to carry along than a sweet, compact tiger nut cake? The very act of placing these confections beside the dead speaks to their importance in life. And it wasn't only the wealthy who enjoyed nut-based snacks. Farmers and laborers could prepare simpler versions, roasted tiger nuts, for instance, or plain sesame seeds carried in pouches. These were inexpensive yet filling, providing energy during long days of work under the scorching sun. Imagine a farmer pausing in his field, pulling a handful of roasted tiger nuts from his pouch, and savoring their earthy sweetness before returning to his plow. Simple, practical, but deeply human. Nuts and seeds also carried symbolic meanings. The tiger nut, for example, appeared in fertility rituals, perhaps because of its rounded shape and connection to Earth's abundance. Honey, as we have seen, was linked to the sun god Ra, symbolizing light and immortality. Together, these ingredients created snacks that were layered with cultural meaning, satisfying both the body and the spirit. We can even catch glimpses of these traditions in Egyptian art and literature. In banquet scenes painted on tomb walls, guests are shown with trays of small cakes and sweets at their side. These weren't grand meals. They were nibbles between sips of beer or wine, much like how we might enjoy hors d'oeuvres at a gathering today. It shows that across centuries, human beings have always delighted in little bites of joy while sharing conversation, laughter, and music. The creativity of the Egyptians with nuts and seeds reveals something profound about their culture. They did not settle for necessity alone. They sought pleasure, comfort, and beauty in even the simplest foods. To grind tiger nuts into cakes, to drizzle honey until it gleamed golden, to decorate breads with sesame seeds. These acts transform snacks into art. They remind us that eating has always been more than survival. It has always been about enjoyment and connection. So, next time you bite into a sesame bar or a honey almond brittle, remember that the roots of such treats stretch back thousands of years. The Egyptians were already experimenting with these combinations, delighting in textures and flavors that still appeal to us today. Their snacks were not primitive. They were surprisingly sophisticated, blending nutrition, symbolism, and taste into creations that stood the test of time. In the world of ancient Egypt, nuts and seeds were never just small foods. They were treasures of flavor, tokens of ritual, and carriers of joy. And in every sticky, honey-sweetened bite, they carried the story of a people who found happiness in the simplest, most enduring pleasures. 5. Savory bites and festive feasts. When we think of snacks, our minds often jump to sweets. But ancient Egypt also had a love for savory treats. Beyond bread, fruits, and honeyed cakes, there were snacks born of salt, smoke, and spice. Foods that carried stronger flavors, lasting longer under the desert sun, and satisfying appetites in ways only savory snacks can. These bites reveal another side of Egyptian taste, one that embraced preservation, celebration, and the shared joy of feasting. Dried fish was among the most common savory snacks. The Nile, teeming with life, provided catfish, tilapia, and mullet that could be salted and dried for storage. Imagine a fisherman pulling nets from the river at dawn, then laying the catch across reed mats to be cured under the hot Egyptian sun. Once dried, the fish became a chewy, salty snack, easy to carry and slow to spoil. For workers traveling far from home or soldiers on campaign, dried fish was a dependable source of energy and protein, the ancient equivalent of modern jerky. Meat was also preserved in similar ways. Strips of beef and goat could be salted, smoked, or sun-dried until they resembled jerky. Goose, a prized bird in Egyptian cuisine, was roasted and sometimes preserved in fat, creating a snack fit for wealthier households. While the common farmer might enjoy dried fish with his bread, nobles might snack on slices of roasted goose, served alongside fruit and beer. These savory treats, though rarer than bread and fruit, carried prestige and flavor that elevated them into delicacies. Festivals provided the perfect stage for such snacks. During celebrations of the gods, communities gathered in temple courtyards for music, dance, and feasting. Savory foods played a central role. Archaeological evidence suggests that roasted meats, fish, and even small poultry were served in portions that could be eaten by hand, much like today's street food. Imagine crowds enjoying roasted skewers while musicians played flutes and dancers swayed under torchlight. These weren't formal banquets. They were joyous celebrations where food was shared, tasted, and enjoyed by many. At elite banquets, the variety of savory bites expanded dramatically. Trays of roasted meats, seasoned with herbs like coriander and dill, were carried by servants to reclining guests. Alongside them came bowls of pickled vegetables, onions, and garlic, sharp, tangy accompaniments that cut through the richness of the meat. These were not large meals, but finger foods, designed to encourage long hours of eating, drinking, and conversation. A nobleman might pluck a roasted goose leg with one hand while sipping wine with the other, surrounded by laughter and music. These gatherings blurred the line between meal and snack, making food a constant companion to entertainment. Specific stories bring these savory snacks to life. Records from the workers' village of Deir el-Medina show rations of dried fish, meat, and bread provided to the artisans who carved the tombs of kings. On feast days, their portions were increased, with small amounts of roasted meats distributed to families. In contrast, tomb paintings of elite banquets show scenes of abundance, platters of meats, breads, and fruits presented in almost theatrical display. The contrast reveals how snacks reflected social class. Humble yet essential for workers, extravagant and symbolic for the wealthy. Garlic and onions deserve special mention. Though simple, they were beloved by Egyptians of all classes, often eaten raw with bread or added to savory dishes. For workers, onions and garlic paired with bread and beer formed a hearty snack, believed to boost strength and endurance. Indeed, ancient records suggest that pyramid builders received rations of onions and garlic daily, seen as vital fuel for their back-breaking labor. What might seem humble to us was, for them, a snack of both nourishment and power. The art of preservation made savory snacks possible. Without refrigeration, Egyptians relied on salt, drying, and fat to extend the life of meats and fish. Clay jars sealed with fat could keep roasted meats fresh for weeks, while dried fish lasted even longer. These methods allowed savory snacks to travel with armies, workers, and traders, spreading Egyptian flavors far beyond the Nile Valley. Every bite of dried fish or salted beef was not just food. It was survival, packaged in taste. But savory snacks were not only about sustenance. They were also about identity. To share roasted goose at a banquet was to affirm wealth and power. To carry dried fish on a journey was to rely on the Nile's bounty. To eat onions and garlic with bread was to connect with the life of the worker, grounded in strength and endurance. These foods carried meaning as surely as they carried flavor, linking Egyptians to their land, their gods, and each other. One vivid example comes from the tomb of Nebamun, where a banquet scene shows guests reaching for roasted meats while musicians play nearby. The detail captures not just the food but the atmosphere, the mingling of flavors, sounds, and emotions that turn snacks into experiences. These paintings remind us that food was never isolated. It was always part of something larger, whether work, worship, or celebration. So, what do savory snacks reveal about Egypt? They show us a people who valued both practicality and pleasure, who knew how to preserve the gifts of their river and fields, and who celebrated life with foods that could be passed from hand to hand. From dried fish to roasted goose, from garlic to onions, savory snacks were as much a part of their identity as the sweet treats we explored earlier. In the smoky aroma of a roasted goose leg, the salty chew of dried fish, and the pungent bite of garlic, we taste not only Egypt's food but its history. These were snacks that fueled workers, entertained nobles, and united communities in celebration. And in every savory bite, Egypt's story was written, flavored with resilience, abundance, and joy. 6. Beer, banquets, and the legacy of snacking. If bread was the heart of Egyptian food, and fruits and nuts its delights, then beer was its soul. No discussion of ancient Egyptian snacks would be complete without this essential companion, the drink that nourished workers, entertained nobles, and stood at the very center of their daily lives. But beer was not just a drink. It was food in liquid form, a snack in itself, and the glue that bound together Egypt's culture of feasting and sharing. Egyptian beer was not the golden, fizzy beverage we know today. It was thick, cloudy, and nourishing, made from bread that had been baked, crumbled, and fermented. In many ways, it was liquid bread, full of calories and nutrients. Workers building the pyramids received daily rations of beer, sometimes as much as 4 liters per day. Imagine stopping for a break from hauling stone blocks and gulping down a clay mug of foamy, grainy beer, both refreshing and filling, enough to fuel another hour of grueling labor. For the common people, beer was daily life. For the elite, it was still beloved, though often accompanied by wine. At feasts and banquets, beer was served alongside trays of fruits, meats, and honey cakes, turning snacks into celebrations. It flowed freely during festivals, where villagers gathered in temple courtyards to dance, sing, and eat together. In these moments, beer was not only nourishment but also joy, blurring the lines between necessity and pleasure. Banquets were where snacks reached their highest form. Elite households hosted gatherings where guests reclined on mats, while servants carried trays of small bites, breads flavored with herbs, honey-drizzled fruits, roasted meats, and nut cakes glistening with honey. Music filled the air, dancers swayed, and beer and wine were poured without measure. In this setting, snacks were more than food. They were symbols of status, hospitality, and sophistication. To offer your guests sweet figs, roasted goose, and plenty of beer was to demonstrate wealth and generosity. One striking image comes from the tomb of Nebamun, where a painted banquet scene shows guests reaching for delicacies while musicians play nearby. You can almost hear the laughter and chatter, the clinking of cups, and the soft rhythm of drums. These paintings capture the essence of Egyptian snacking culture. Food was not eaten in silence but celebrated with community, music, and life. Every bite carried with it the flavor of togetherness. Even in death, beer and snacks remained essential. Tombs across Egypt reveal jars of beer, baskets of bread, dates, and nut cakes placed carefully beside the mummified dead. These were not symbolic alone. They were provisions for eternity. The Egyptians believed that in the afterlife, the soul would eat and drink just as in life, and so they ensured that their beloved snacks would accompany them. Imagine Tutankhamun stepping into the afterlife with a loaf of honey bread in one hand and a jar of beer in the other. For Egyptians, such details mattered. They were as eternal as the pyramids themselves. The symbolism of beer and snacks extended into religion. Bread and beer were the most common offerings to the gods, symbols of life and renewal. Priests presented them daily at temples, ensuring that divine favor continued to bless the land. Honey cakes, fruits, and roasted meats appeared during special ceremonies, reinforcing the sacred bond between people and their deities. Food was never just fuel. It was communication, prayer, and gratitude. But what makes Egypt's snacking culture truly remarkable is its timelessness. Though thousands of years separate us, the core experience feels familiar. Workers munching bread and onions during a break are not so different from modern laborers unwrapping sandwiches. Children savoring sticky figs mirror today's kids clutching candy bars. Guests nibbling roasted meats and honey cakes at banquets are not far from us, enjoying hors d'oeuvres at parties. The details differ, but the human joy of snacking is unchanged. And so, what do ancient Egyptian snacks tell us about their civilization? They tell us that food was central to life, both humble and divine. They reveal a people who took pleasure in sweetness, found strength in savoriness, and elevated even simple bites into symbols of love, ritual, and eternity. They remind us that while Egypt gave the world pyramids, mummies, and hieroglyphs, it also gave us something profoundly human: the comfort of snacks. As we conclude this journey, picture yourself once more in the market by the Nile. The sun is setting, casting a warm glow over baskets of figs, loaves of bread, and jars of honey. A fisherman chews on dried fish while laughing with a neighbor. A noblewoman sips wine and nibbles roasted goose. A child sneaks a sticky date from his mother's basket. And a worker, weary from the fields, lifts a clay cup of beer to his lips. In these simple acts, we see the heart of Egypt, not just in its monuments but in its snacks, timeless and enduring. So, the next time you reach for a cookie, a handful of nuts, or a slice of bread, remember, thousands of years ago, on the banks of the Nile, someone did the same. And in that moment, across centuries, we are connected by the oldest, simplest, and sweetest of human joys, the snack.